All right, so welcome back. Good afternoon from Newcastle, and this is the last talk of today and last talk of the webinar. And Andrea gave you a nice introduction into the methodology of the metalwork, and it would be also quite useful. You have seen some examples of the prehistoric metalwork from the British Isles. And in comparison to ancient Egyptian metalwork of especially the Bronze Age, you will see that there are not that much differences there. And one of the points of the Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowships is that the fellow moves somewhere else and is learning new things. And in my case, this was actually the metalwork, and I am trying to apply this methodology that was developed by Andrea. I'm trying to learn it from him and apply it on ancient Egyptian and Nubian metalwork when and where it was never applied in a systemic way. And in following roughly 45 minutes, we will investigate the scale of the production and use were on the study tool blades. I will be showing you some micrographs, and most of the micrographs that I will be showing you were done by the stereo microscope that Andrea was also demonstrating the possibilities of the metalwork, where it's not that heavy, it's portable, and I was able to have it, for example, in some collections in the United States or elsewhere and study the metalwork in detail. And you will see that the studied tool blades are in the range from really unworked casts to well-worn blades that were very likely used for a long time. And in the end, I will try to argue that in some cases it is possible to distinguish tool blades from the weapon blades based on the metalwork wear. First, as a reminder, I have already told you yesterday that we have, from archaeological context, we have a lot of molds, casting mold preserved. And in the Bronze Age, casting molds were already shaped roughly in the shape of the finished artifact. So metalworker, when he was casting the alloyed material from a crucible, he already knew what he was casting for, what specific type of object, and there are many molds found, for example, from Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom Wuhan, from Second Intermediate period Aniba, that was studied by us within the context in Leipzig. There is also a mold, stone mold from Middle Kingdom Askut, and some stone ones from Sarabid el Khadim. Based on the shape, these X blades are datable to the early New Kingdom, and it's quite interesting because they are located on Sinai Peninsula. Sarabit el Khadim is one of the most famous sites there, and it's a very good indication that also some production and alloying was going on there, very close to the mining sites. This is another example from my recent book. These are molds from Middle Kingdom Cahun, which are now in the collection of Manchester Museum. And here you can see, for example, the molds for knives, for an X blade, for an edge blade, and another ceramic mold for an edge blade. And I'm not a specialist in ceramic pastes, but very often the material seems to me very similar to types of pottery that are called in ceramic studies, in ancient Egyptian ceramic studies, as bread molds. And actually, in ancient Egyptian, both these molds for casting objects and the bread molds were denoted by the same word, beja, and this word was used as well for crucibles. And Egyptians saw almost no distinction within their language between those different types of material culture. Based on the text, each of these types is called, or categories of the material culture is called beja. I will be showing you different objects from different collections, and as example of this wide range of metalwork ware. And we are beginning with an edge blade, a very likely pre-dynastic edge blade from the Museum of Mediterranean and Near Eastern Antiquities in Stockholm, in Sweden, or in Swedish Medelhavsmuseet. And there it is, the edge blade with this number. It's unfortunately unprovenanced, and in the museum database, the provenance data are that it was purchased in Egypt at the end of 19th century by Frederick Robert Martin, and it's on loan from the Historic Museum since 30s. That is all that we have. It looks like that the edge blade was cleaned from corrosion products. And there are macroscopically visible dendrites structures, as Andrea was showing you on one of the blades, and as Yiji was also showing in his lecture on the micrograph. These are structures that are created in metal after casting, when nothing else happened to the metal. And it looks like this edge was cast, perhaps sharpened at the edge, and then nothing happened to it. And here is a micrograph done with a stereo microscope, and you can see how, as Andrea was telling you, these three-dimensional structures, dendrites that really are visible macroscopically, and you can see it even better with a microscope. And maybe there was slight sharpening of the blade or some light use on these edges, but we don't know, because we don't know. Unfortunately, there are no records about the cleaning of this edge blade in the museum, so we don't know what happened between the moment of the purchase and the moment of the deposition or in the museum collection. Sorry, but in this case, the dendrites are so well visible, so you don't even need microscope. You can see them either with your own eyes, or this is a documentation with a macro lens with just a regular Canon camera, where you can really photograph the dendrites on the blade, and there is very limited production wear after that on this blade. Now we are moving to the Middle Kingdom, Middle Bronze Age, and this is from site Kahun, which is located near Fayum Oasis in Egypt. And this is artifact after casting, which was slightly worked. This was intended to be a knife blade, and it's now in the Petrie Museum, University College London, Petrie Museum of Egyptian and Sudanese Archaeology. And most of the objects in this collection are coming from the excavations of British archaeologist Flinders Petrie that he conducted in Egypt in late 19th century and early 20th century. And this is one of the interesting objects. You can see on the surface, even with a bare eye and photographed with macro lens, these cracks on the surface and some structuration on the clean surface. On the other side, it's even better visible. So here are some of the cracks, and here we have also quite possibly some bubbles, some casting defects of the cast, which were left in the surface. And my interpretation of this cast is that this is something that was cast into the mold, and it was then worked, but then for whatever reason, the artisan that was working on this, the metal worker that was working on this, decided that he will not continue in working on this, and this is something that is unfinished artifact, and it's really a moment frozen in time of something that is not a finished artifact, but based on what we know about how metals behave. and how they have the properties. This is something not finished as the craftsman would intend. And here's a close-up from the microscope where you can see the cracks as well as the dendritic structures. Not so well visible here, but yeah, these are dendrites on the surface, which again, it's an unworked surface, and indication that this is something unfinished. And luckily enough, the publication by Petrie from 1890 also contains this plate where there are depicted some finds from the Middle Kingdom Kahun. And here we can see also this particular unfinished blade that was found here. And on the other side, you can see in the rectangle finished knife blades. Something that was the initial stage of the production is here in the upper left corner, and I have been able to study it in the Petrie Museum. And the original intention was produce something like this out of this blade. And many of these objects that I will be showing you on the following slides have been found at Kahun and are now in Petrie Museum, and they were found in this basket as a storage for future use, but unfortunately the person who was storing that was unable to pick it up, and it only happened with the archaeological excavation. And fortunately there are several stages of production. So we will focus now on this blade, which is not in the Petrie, but actually this one is in Manchester Museum under number 201, 201. And here you can see that this is nicely finished, nicely done blade, well polished, cleaned. Maybe it started to be used. So here we have some nick on the blade, which was freshly sharpened, but then for whatever reason, there was some structural defect in the blade. So the blade cracked in the middle, and Middle Kingdom Egyptian was definitely using some then contemporary swear words, because this was a lot of work put into this particular artifact. But as you can see, he was unable to use it further because of this structural mistake or a problem. And again, this is something that you don't need microscope to see this, but you need some understanding of metals and what are their properties, so that you can explain what is happening here. As an example of tool which was used quite heavily, this is also this is coming from Kahun, is this other blade, and this is definitely in the Petrie Museum of Egyptian and Sudanese archaeology with its number. It's late Middle Kingdom, and you have seen in Andra's presentation these striations, which were interpreted as coming from the woodwork, and this even from the macroscopic observation of the complete photograph, you can see that this blade is well rounded, well worn, and it was used. It was very likely used quite often. There was no structural problem here. This was a tool that was well serving his owner for a long time, and based on Andra's experiments and based on comparison with other studied specimens of ancient metalwork, the most possible interpretation of this is that these are traces of the woodworking. Further, we will focus on artifacts that are smaller. We have been talking a lot about chisels and Melanie's contribution this morning. And this is an example from Middle Kingdom Cahoon, where you can see that the blades are smaller. So also possibilities of studying the metalwork wear are slightly less advantageous because the artifact is not so big. But you can see here, even with a bare eye, you can see some dendritic structures from the casting. Maybe it was lightly worked to the shape, and this part of the chisel was held in hand, and at this end, artisan was definitely using a mallet to pound on the chisel. Mallet in one hand, chisel in the other, and the burr was the part of the chisel that was receiving the blows. And you can see how the material, the copper, is plastically overhanging the burr here. And this is the blade, which is smaller than on the X that I was showing you before. But again, you can see even within on this macro photograph that it's well rounded, and that is it was quite possibly used for a long time, and was rounded by use. And this is a micrograph of the same blade under the stereo microscope, where you can see the shape. Unfortunately, this is a real thing. This is a real object, and you need to balance it under the microscope. So it's never an ideally flat surface. So usually you are doing multiple photographs with different places for focus, and then you need to combine the photographs to have the final photograph, or having a photograph that at least catches most of the details of the roundedness of this chisel. That again looks like an object that was quite heavily used. It's again rather probable that this was used for woodworking, although there is much less use wear preserved here, and the surface is smaller. Yesterday, I was showing you this Middle Kingdom scene from the tomb of Nomarch Khnumhotep II from Beni Hassan, and here we could see the fenestrated weapon, but also some of the tools. And you have just seen some Middle Kingdom examples of actual artifacts, and I'm trying in my research to show that the iconographic sources give us some pieces of evidence, for example, how the tools were used. But when we want to study the actual metalwork, where we need to pay closer attention to the actually preserved artifacts from that periods of time, where we can, with microscopes or with other types of methodology, from archaeometallurgy, we can study and understand how these tools were actually used. So it's not only about the artistic rendering, but we are also obtaining information that might be then later on relevant, for example, for comparison in the European Bronze Age, where these beautiful iconographic sources are not available because European Bronze Age inhabitants did not build these large decorated tombs as they were in Egypt then. As an example of different chisel, this is a specimen that was found by Herbert Winlock in the Western Thebes, and in front of Chamber 3, west of the tomb MMA 101, datable the tomb into the 11th dynasty, into the reign of Mentuhotep II, so in the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. And this context next to the rock tomb is most probably indicative of the use The mallet is coming from a different part of Western Egypt. It's coming from the mallet is even coming from Lish South, so a different side in the Middle Kingdom Egypt. But very likely such artifacts could have been used together in Middle Kingdom Egypt. And here the use where you can see is more rugged on the blade edge. And here I would say that this chisel rather was used for stonework, also based on the context. And Winlock was able to demonstrate that this owner's mark that is on the cutout into the blade is also found in other contexts in the early Middle Kingdom Western Thebes. So this is likely an indication of the working team that was owning this particular chisel. And today is in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. And last summer, I was also able to study this chisel and produce some microphotographs, although they are not here in this presentation. And it was also analyzed for my research, and it was found out to be made of arsenical copper. So clearly, this is datable to the early Middle Kingdom. And you can see, in comparison to the chisel from Cahoon, that the metalwork here is different from what is preserved here on this blade from Dar el-Bahari. And it's one of the few good examples of very probably stoneworking chisels that were found in archaeological context, because this is quite a lot of metal, so it would be otherwise recycled. Thus, we have to imagine an unhappy early Middle Kingdom Egyptian that lost this chisel and was unable to recover it. As other example of production and useware, this is an early dynastic X-blade, which was found at Abydos by Petrie. It's now in the Petrie Museum UCL. And Jiří Kmošek analyzed it kindly, and it was copper with about 0.3 weight% of arsenic. And it's not that well visible on the photograph from the museum, but when you look on the photograph from the stereo microscope, you can see the surface, which now you already know, these are dendrites. So this is something that was cast and then not worked afterwards. And into the surface was cut the inscription, which we can actually read. Because this is First Dynasty, these are already there are already texts in hieroglyphic script, and this is very probably personal name Kahotep that is written on this particular X-blade, and it was found in the North Cemetery, subsidiary burials of the funerary enclosure of King Jer, one of the first kings of the First Dynasty, in this particular grave, and since there is almost no useware on the blade edge, my interpretation of this particular artifact is that it was very likely produced straight to the burial. It was not used, or maybe if it was used, it was resharpened so that it will be deposited within the burial in the First Dynasty. Yesterday we were speaking also about edge blades, and these are from my recent publication all, at least to me, all known Old Kingdom edge blades that were found in archaeological context, and some of them were unprovenanced, and these are on the letter A is an edge blade that was bought by Petrie in Giza, and then it became a part of the collection of Petrie Museum UCL. The other edge blade was again found by Petrie at Meidum, and the whole artifact is possibly in Egypt right now, but the samples are available again at the Petrie Museum UCL. The third one was found by George Andrew Reisner at Giza in the Menkaure Wali Temple and is now in Boston. Fourth one under letter D was found by by the team of Salim Hassan at Giza and is now in Egyptian Museum Cairo. Example under letter E was bought on the market and now is part of the collection of the British Museum. And as I published already in my first book, I have doubts about this inscription because this looks very much like something written from Gardiner or produced based on the examples of hieroglyphs as they are rendered in the 20th century, and also the shape is rather late sixth dynasty. This is coming from a collection of collector Michailidis, who was really complicated and complex figure and controversial. And there are also some other problematic objects coming from Michailidis' collection. So I would not be that sure about the technology, about the ancient provenance of the inscription, although the artifact is most probably ancient, and I think it was made of arsenical copper. It was analyzed in British Museum. The edge blade under letter F was found at the Upper Egyptian site, Elka, by Belgian mission, and is now in the collection in Brussels. And it was analyzed, and I think again this is arsenical copper. But on following slides, we will focus on the first one, on this first blade. And here is a detail photographed by the macro lens of the inscription with the cartouche of King Snofru, so the first king of the 4th dynasty, and a reference to one of his working teams, the lovers of the white crown, and the last two signs can be read as a reference to craftsmen. And since this was bought by Petrie on the market in Giza while he was excavating, I think at Meidum, there were some doubts again about this particular artifact, but we have analyzed it, and recently with PXRF, Yijik Moshek analyzed it, and it's arsenical copper without doubt, and it's something that was not that well known in the beginning of 20th century about ancient Egyptian copper. So very likely the artifact is genuine, and also the inscription is genuine because it is produced by several different chisel blows and chisel cuts continually. So you can see in the detail, and again, you already know on the left side, dendrites into the surface, and there are chisel cuts, several chisel cuts, which are producing the hieroglyphs. With stereo microscope, I have produced documentation for all the inscription, and it's also important in my research to try to study closely the inscriptions where there are almost no doubts about their ancient provenance, and then trying to identify some of the more questionable inscriptions on some blades which are unprovenance, for example, the blades that are coming from Michailidis' collection. Other part of this is the blade edge of the part, so we can see that it was used for some time, and right now I have no logical or reasonable explanation for these cuts. These cuts, maybe when this was found in the 19th, early 20th century, they tried to cut it into multiple pieces, maybe recycle, and this was unsuccessful. This is one of the possible interpretations. And maybe also this artifact was slightly overcleaned because when you focus on some other parts of the blade, above the surface of these dendrites, there were also some traces of the polishing of the surface roughly in the middle of the edge blade. And these are photographs that I did with the stereo microscope, where you can see the dendritic structures below. But here are these on your image right now, horizontal striations, which are very likely ancient traces of the polishing of the original surface of the edge blade as it was in the 4th dynasty when this edge blade was produced and it was used. And unfortunately, because of the corrosion and also maybe because of the past cleaning of this artifact, this polishing was not preserved completely on the surface, but only in some parts. And for example, here where there is inscription, maybe this was also polished, but we can see only the dendrites and the polishing on the topmost level of the surface of this artifact is basically gone in case of the inscription. I have been showing you the tool blades, and now for comparison, I will show you some of the artifacts that can be typologically identified rather as weapon blades. And for me, even though I'm doing research on ancient Egyptian tools, it's very important to have a comparison between the typological tools and compare them to artifacts that we can distinguish as ancient Egyptian weapons and the objects that were unlikely to be used as tools in the past. One of the examples is an arsenic copper blade from the museum in Stockholm with this number, and you can see that the blade edge is worn, but in a different way that you have seen in the case of tools. There are different nicks and cuts into the surface of the blade here, and you can clearly see that something very different is happening on this blade than on the blades you have seen before. And this I'm arguing in my recent work that these blades can be dated more precisely to the second intermediate period, and these are reaction of on these contemporary quote-unquote Hyksos blades, which are narrow and have this thin and small edge and can be thrown, which might be the case also for these X blades from the second intermediate period. Unfortunately, not always the production wear and use wear is preserved that well. And here is an example from the collection of the Egypt Center of the Swansea University, which is again unprovenanced. And this is an example of how, when I'm doing my work, what is the process. Fortunately, in case of this collection, most of the pieces are already photographed online in the database by the curator in the collection, Kenneth Griffin. So I can work with those photographs, and when I'm producing the micrographs from the stereo microscope, I can identify the different areas on the surface of the blade. So I don't have to do the sketch as Andrea was showing you, but I can already work with a photograph and locate the precise area which I'm documenting on the blade with microscope on this great complete photograph of the blade. And here you can see on this area that there is maybe some hammering of the blade and some polishing, but not much of any use. And there are some nicks and some disturbations on the blade edge. Unfortunately, this blade edge is quite thin, and there is some patina around these nicks and these disturbations. So I really, at this point of time, I'm hesitant to decide whether this is a result of corrosion processes on this very thin blade edge, or this is rather a result of the blade, Battle Axe blade used in action. You may recall the Middle Kingdom scene from Beni Hassan, where this blade was held by one of the bodyguards. We have it in this PowerPoint, so we can come back slightly earlier. Here it is above an arrow, you can see this is the iconographic depiction of a battle axe. In the other hand, this bodyguard is holding a shield, and here the main character here in this scene is the nomarch Numhotep, who is identified also by the inscription, and he is he's observing the work on a wooden boat, and you can see the different shapes of the artisan tools, and this, which is clearly identified as an open-carried weapon in this context of Middle Kingdom craft scene. This is the iconographic rendering. And here from Swansea, we have actual artifact, possibly with some useware preserved on the blade edge. Here is another example from the site of Mustageda. I was mentioning it yesterday. This is again datable to late Middle Kingdom or second intermediate period. And interpretation of these undulations on the surface, on the blade edge. Again, this is rather something that was used as a weapon, not as a tool blade. And it's also, the blade is quite thin. And I documented the blade edge with micrographs and the plastic deformations of the material that are especially on the blade edge. We have, of course, a number of battle scenes from the ancient Egyptian iconography of the Bronze Age, but sometimes we have also some more peculiar sources. So we have to be careful about what we are saying about the possible use of these objects. And here's an example of something that is quite rare. There are two scenes in the Old Kingdom tombs where the axe is used for killing a hippopotamus. This is Old Kingdom tomb of Akhethotep at Saqqara, which is now in the Louvre. And here you can clearly see a guy on a boat. One of the guys is holding a harpoon, and he is harpooning a hippopotamus, but the other guy is holding clearly an axe blade from the Old Kingdom in Old Kingdom shape, in the shape that would be typologically rather distinguished as an artisan tool, but now he is using that object to possibly kill a hippopotamus. One of the blades that I studied in Newcastle is again coming from the late Middle Kingdom to second intermediate period context, and was found at the British Museum excavations by Guy Branton in Middle Egypt. It's coming from the site of Badari, and this is actually the first blade that I studied during my project in Newcastle within the Wolfson Archaeological Laboratory. And again, you can see on the blade edge these deformations and undulations and different nicks and scratches. And you can clearly see that these are very different from the tools I was showing you from Cahoon from roughly the same time. So my interpretation of this useware is that this is very probably referring rather to use as a weapon than as a tool blade. And there are also some other interesting traces documentable. So, for example, in this part of the blade, we are able to document the polishing traces of the surface, which is uneven. Somewhere even roughly in this area, you even can see the dendrites on the surface. So only the blade edge was massively worked to be practically used. So this is probably a weapon, whereas I was showing you the blade from Cahoon, where you have these regular striations and very rounded shape of the axe that was repeatedly used to chop wood day after day, month after month. And it was probably shortened by use, but you can see here that this is, compared to this is a very different form of the useware. And here is a comparison of these two blades where, fortunately or unfortunately, in this time, in late Middle Kingdom, the shapes of the artisan tools and shapes of weapon blades are very similar. But based on these observations, we are able to tentatively identify either the tools or the weapon blades. Of course, this is something that is in the peer review and in the academic debates. This is something that is highly disputable because there are numerous other interpretations. The bottom line for me is that even though the interpretations in the future might differ because we might understand better the material and the specific traces, what we can do right now is to make as good documentation of as possible of the traces, discuss it in open forums like these, like this webinar, and trying to elicit feedback from you, what you think about it. But if the documentation is created, then other researchers can compare other material in other museum collections, or also material that is freshly excavated in Egypt, where there is also a higher chance of finding some residues on the blade edges, which might indicate more or in better detail how these blades were used. And that is actually all for me for now.